What the hell is Tesla stock doing? It goes up, it goes down, it goes back up, but where the heck is it going to go next? We got to tackle a few other stocks first, but if you'd like to skip ahead and go to my Tesla stock prediction, go to this timestamp right here. The 10-year yield did pop higher, and thank you if you are subscribed, because last week we were talking about the yield possibly popping higher right in this area here. We actually were able to find the bottom there. So what I'm expecting from here, last week we said we are going to see this pop. We saw it. Maybe now we see some kind of consolidation in here, possibly even a retest to then go a little bit higher to give us another bigger pullback in the market to find some buyers. The reason that I felt that we were going to see a pop in the 10-year yield is because of this right here, TLT. I am a TLT trader, and what I told you last week, and I warned you about before it happened, was we were getting these highs here, and they were creating divergences on the MACD, a triple divergence here, and even a divergence on the RSI. And we pay attention to those things because that's how I like to trade. And we said this is most likely going to fall out, and we will see what happens from here. But in my next episode, I said this looks like it is consolidating and wants to go for one push lower, which makes total sense because we have a gap down below that we want to fill, and it looks like that is exactly what we are going to do. And then we will have to come back to the charts possibly tomorrow to see what the reaction from these levels was. There's not too much more I can say about TLT except for the fact that I've been paying attention for about a week to this head and shoulders forming here. And we actually can go all the way down to the low here and have that head and shoulders still in play. And maybe that's when we see a divergence and we get to rocket up to the upside. If we do break this, that would mean yields are going to come down. So I don't necessarily think that's going to happen. It might be a fake out. But overall, I believe that we are going to see some kind of rise in the stock market, possibly even TLT, by the CPI date, which is September 13th. And I can't stress it enough to mark that September 13th CPI date on your chart because it is going to be a huge catalyst. No matter where the prices are at the time of the CPI, we are going to see some kind of big shift at that date or the day or a couple days after. The last thumbs up that we can give ourselves is the VIX because we called this one. Last week we said that these lows here look like that they needed to pop higher in order to get some fear back in the market. I now believe that that move is finished, at least the first leg, and then we are consolidating, pulling back, and then we are going to possibly launch up into this short-term trend line before we get a plunge downward by that CPI date and give us some sort of divergence here at the bottom. The reason I think that the VIX has one more push in it is because of this curling up in the 30-minute chart on the MACD. As you can see, the MACD is starting to curl up. This is starting to get a big reaction off of this support here, and we are going to then bounce possibly up into this area, give ourselves some kind of wedge formation, and give us an even better divergence on a 30-minute chart, which will then possibly show us that there's weakness and there's going to see more upside in stocks and downside for the VIX. Now let's get into the good stuff, the SPY. It is pulling back to that basic level that we stated last week. I said that from this high I was expecting a reaction from this gap resistance, and it looks like we did actually pull back a little bit. A lot of stocks are sitting a little high, so we would like to see a further pullback possibly into this area, possibly even lower to this support level here before we see the VIX hit that little trend line, and then we will push up into either the gap fill or even the high from this year. That will be right around that. Look at that, Wednesday, 13th of September. What happens that date? The CPI, which I believe will be the catalyst that eventually tears this down. I believe it's important to be open to all scenarios, and there is weakness here. We have red bars ticking on the histogram here on the MACD. We have a 4-hour that looks like it wants to roll over. This could easily be some kind of plunge downward. We could even see the crash happen for now, but overall, I don't believe that that's what's going to happen. If anything, we will see a downward trajectory until that CPI day, and maybe that gives us another lower high that then pulls us down and we see that 2023 stock market crash. Switching over to the Qs, everything that I said for the SPY can translate over to the Qs right now. They're sitting at similar areas. I still like the Qs to come down into these areas to find some buyers, and then maybe if you're in a bullish case, we push up into these areas. We have to be open to all scenarios. So don't have a super bearish hat on just because I'm telling you to watch out for the CPI. You want to see what those numbers are. You want to see how the market reacts. And that's why I like to tell you to stay out of those big data drops maybe for the first hour. Just because you don't get the best price doesn't mean you're not going to get a good price on a trade. But as I go into shorter time frames, I start to see that there is weakness at this level, and that's right around our gap resistance for the Q. So this easily could pull back down, give us another point of reference, allow us to even get some buyers, possibly even cutting through this consolidation, and then we see that push higher into that CPI date, where then the rug will be pulled. One of the tech stocks that is not seeing any kind of pullback is Apple. Apple is just short squeezing to the upside. We saw this slight downturn, I think of about like 0.5%, to possibly go and give us a little turn to go find some buyers. That didn't happen. So I still believe that the VIX has room to pop a little higher because Apple, I would like it to at least come down into this prior resistance zone that became support and then launch higher. Now, I also think that the bulls want this to come back because if this does not taper off or pull back or anything like that before the CPI date, and this just keeps going, then you're in an even worse spot. You're in a spot where a bigger crash can happen, and you are going to be trapped in an even bigger, well, bull trap. Overall, how I see this playing out is it will come down at least into this area before we get any kind of pop. But like I said, what I really would like to happen is see a bigger downturn possibly into this trend line. That would give me an actual entry point to take a trade, and then we push higher with a big short squeeze into that CPI date. And that CPI date is going to rip Apple's face off, in my opinion. Also, sorry if you hear squeaking, my pit bull is playing with his toy, my bad. As I go into shorter time frames on Apple, I would say if this doesn't see any kind of pullback and just keeps squeezing into that CPI date, I would be very fearful as a bull. I would much rather, even though this right here on the MACD is starting to turn back up and possibly going to cross, we do not have much room up here on the RSI. Sorry, it's small at the bottom of my screen, but we don't have much room up here. So there is not much upside left in this move if it doesn't pull back. So I would still like it to at least come into this area, if not coming all the way down into this little trend line, and then finding buyers to then launch up higher, getting a nice short squeeze before the CPI is released. Now let's get to the good stuff, Tesla. It's kind of hard to draw anything on this chart here. The main thing that I was going to do was draw between this little bit of a trend line here, but it looks like we did break that trend line and then we actually took it back. So it is possible that we do extend a little bit higher, but what I'm kind of paying attention to is the lower high scenario here where we do see that bigger pullback in Tesla and Apple and the Qs in general. We come down, we find buyers once again in this area, and then we launch higher into that CPI date, which then also rips Tesla's face off. So I'm going to get rid of that trend line just because I don't see it being relevant, but all we can take from here is we hit up in here, we are pulling back, and now we're seeing another extension, and it looks like we are going to roll over. And the reason that I've come to that conclusion is because if you look at a 15-minute, we are already seeing red bars on the histogram for the MACD, and if we break down even further to the 5-minute, we actually, when we blow this up a little bit, and let me move it for you, we actually are starting to see some kind of big divergence on the 5-minute, which means in the very short term, we could see a turnaround. Price is starting to coil up nice and tight in here, and we will have to see from there. But mostly what I think is going to happen is, let me zoom out one more time, Tesla is going to get that pullback back into these areas, possibly down into here, give us some kind of divergence on a 30-minute chart, and then we will see some kind of launch higher into that CPI date, which, once again, you want to be watching that CPI date. I believe that inflation is back in the market. The Federal Reserve has come out. Jerome Powell's come out. He has said they are willing to raise rates based on the data after he got 6 months of good data, which just means to me that he knows something that we don't. And I think he knows that the CPI inflation is going to report itself back into the data, and he's going to be able to use that to then make his next move, which is going to be raising rates. Boom. But Tesla lovers, the good part is once we go find buyers one more time, I believe we're going up, and we could see this thing go all the way up into this gap fill area by the time the CPI is released. Let's see where that gap fill is, it is right here. The gap resistance is here. So those are the two levels that you're going to watch out for. Somewhere around 280 and somewhere around 291 are the two levels that you want to be paying attention to for a downside turn. And you want to be looking at those shorter time frames, seeing if there is some kind of divergence on a 30-minute, on an hourly, on a 2-hour chart that you can use to give yourself some kind of probability increase that there is going to be some kind of downside move. This could play out to the downside. First, we get that push up into the CPI, possibly filling this gap here, and then we come down into this point of support. Actually, it's more like resistance that became support. We see some resistance here. We broke it pretty cleanly here, but we see resistance, 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 and then we bursted through it. We didn't give it a chance to resist us here. So I believe we are going to come back down into this level of about, what is that, 207.50, and then we may see one little bounce up, possibly to test another form of support that's becoming resistance, and then we will see a plunge at least down to this $154 price point. What are the main takeaways from this video? We are still probably going to see some kind of pullback, but we should not be surprised if the market does try to extend even higher all the way up into the CPI. I would just like to see that pullback because at least we will seem a little bit healthier into that CPI reading. But if we get no pullback in Apple whatsoever, then I believe that the CPI will be bad news for the market and we will start to see that crash of 2023 start to unfold. And if you're a Tesla bull, hey, you still might have some upside until there's a big crash that happens. You could gap fill, you could go to the gap resistance. There's plenty of upside that is above you that makes total sense for market makers to want that price to go to. But overall, be paying attention to September 13th because when that data is released, inflation could be back in the market, and that will be very bad for any kind of tech stock, any kind of growth stock. If you want me to do a prediction for a different stock in the future, please put it in the comments. And I just want to say thank you guys for watching so much. Please like and subscribe if you found anything helpful. Peace.